Hello, fellow architects. Welcome back to the stream. Now, today, still trying to get my my sea legs, so to speak. I haven't figured out quite my schedule yet, so I'm not sure. Trying to fit in some more news roundups. There can be a lot we can discuss. And I actually found some interesting news stories and stuff as well. But once again tonight, I think we're going to since we lost an hour and a bit that we normally have for news roundup, I figure we would continue, especially because Yoshi OST requested that we'd go through fault lines. So we're gonna put the brakes on Mission of God. We will get through that book eventually someday. But yeah, we're gonna go through that. We're gonna read chapter 1, which is in fact entitled A Black Man. But I also want to read the preamble and the introduction. So it's sort of like a preamble and then an amble, a pre-preamble and a preamble, which is the introduction, and then so it'll be about 20 pages or so, and then we'll see where we can we go from there. So starting out at the top of the book here, we got some praise from Josh Bice and Mark Devine regarding fault lines. Louis Marcos and Owen Strand, who are another one of our favorites around here. That's just like the recommendations sort of page. This book came out this year, so it'll be highly relevant, I imagine. And it shouldn't be a very long read, I think. We might even go chapter 2 if we end up keep it going on. Let's see. So those of you who joined me last time on my study stream know that I already read the first couple paragraphs. Let's read it again as we begin today. 1989 was a banner year. Not because the World Wide Web was invented, the Berlin Wall came down, Nintendo came out with the Game Boy, and I met and married the woman of my dreams. Those were all big, but I met and married the woman, but 4 other things happened in 1989 that were at least as big, things that shaped the current war being waged in our midst. Harvard law professor Derek Bell and some colleagues held a conference in Wisconsin, where critical race theory was officially born. Bell's protege, Kimberlé Crenshaw, introduced the idea of intersectionality in her paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. That's quite the name. Peggy McIntosh introduced White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and 2 other Harvard professors, Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen, published their little-known but monumentally influential book, After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. All these publications have one thing in common. They are all the product of the same worldview, critical social justice, CSJ, which is the subject of this book. In order to understand CSJ, we must first understand where it came from. Rather than a glossary or a timeline, I want to give you what I call a thought line. Here's a very brief sketch of the development of the ideas this book will address. The roots of CSJ. Karl Marx's conflict theory, and we actually learned a little bit about Karl Marx even last time. Liam, welcome. God bless you. Good to see you again. You're still hanging out on Twitch, still hanging out with the crew, with the Christian crew on Twitch. God bless, man. Good to see you. Yeah. Blessings to you. I trying to find time to schedule in streams right now, but I'm missing it for sure. We're going through a new book today, one that was kind of requested by Yoshi OST. So we're putting on Mission of God on hold as we do this. So yeah, Karl Marx's conflict theory. We went over that a little bit, kind of like his perspective, Karl Marx's perspective, in regards to last week, in regards to his understanding of sexuality and how he thought that the natural state of man is one where everyone has sex with everyone, and there's just like it's just everyone propagates that stuff that way. And so like the breakdown of the family to him was a very important step in reaching this utopia. It's interesting that like Karl Marx's vision of utopia and like sexual revolution was sort of connected, but we went over that in Mission of God last time. But in regards to the roots of critical social justice, German philosopher Karl Marx was the leading architect of the most dominant school of thought within sociology, known as conflict theory. Marx viewed society as a group of different social classes, all competing for a limited pool of resources, such as food, housing, employment, education, and leisure time. Antonio Gramsci and hegemony. Simply put, so right now we're going through like basic definitions that are going to be addressed in the book. Like the way Voddie here describes it as a thought line. It's like rather than a timeline, it's a thought line where like here's where the thoughts kind of came together, without actually giving specific times and dates to these things. Antonio Gramsci and hegemony. Simply put, hegemony is what takes place when a dominant group imposes its ideology on the rest of society. Quote, thus, social control is achieved through conditioning rather than physical force or intimidation. End quote. That's a quote from Robin DiAngelo in her book, Is Everyone Really Equal? An Introduction to Key Concepts in Social Justice Education. And we all know Robin DiAngelo is, she's the one who did the White Fragility book, which has big problems in regards to the total upending of the biblical understanding of the human beings and their different cultures and the like. So, Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci developed this concept to explain how domination and control are maintained not only through coercion, but also through the voluntary consent of both the oppressed and their oppressors to maintain the status quo. Gramsci redefined hegemony as, quote, a complex interlocking of political, social, and cultural forces, end quote. Frankfurt School and critical theory. After the Marxist Revolution failed to topple capitalism in the early 20th century, many Marxists went back to the drawing board, modifying and adapting Marx's ideas. Perhaps the most famous was a group associated with the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, which applied Marxism to a radical, interdisciplinary social theory. The group included Max Horkheimer, T.W. Adorno, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse, George Lukács, and Walter Benjamin, and came to be known as the Frankfurt School. These men developed critical theory as an expansion of conflict theory, the one posed by Marx, and applied it more broadly, including other social sciences and philosophy. Their main goal was to address structural issues causing inequality. They worked from the assumption that current social reality was broken, and they needed to identify the people and institutions that could make changes and provide practical goals for social transformation. Putting it all together. In order to understand critical theory, it is important to understand how the words critical and theory are used. In the social sciences, critical is, quote, geared toward identifying and exposing problems in order to facilitate revolutionary political change, end quote. And that's from Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. Oh, we know who that is. In his book, Cynical Theories. So once again, critical means is geared toward identifying and exposing problems in order to facilitate revolutionary political change. In other words, it implies revolution. It is not interested in reform. Hence, we do not reform the police, we defund the police, or abolish them. Quote, it is more interested in problematizing, that is, finding ways in which the system is imperfect and making noise about them, reasonably or not, than it is in any other identifiable activity, especially building something constructive, end quote. Once again, from Cynical Theories. This is complicated by the fact that critical theory denies objective truth. That's key. Christians, this is why, again, why Christians and woke ideology are so, like, they're butting heads so much, is because Christians believe very strongly in objective truth, objective reality. Quote, an approach based on critical theory calls into question the idea that objectivity is desirable or even possible. This is where the 2 + 2 = 4, controversy happened last summer. Writes, so that's what the quote there, writes Oslem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo in Is Everyone Really Equal? The term used to describe this way of thinking about knowledge is that knowledge is reflexive of the values and interests of those who produce it. But this is only half the puzzle. The word theory can be used in 2 ways in the social sciences. As an abstract noun, as in the phrase, or as in the sentence, I have a theory about that, or as a proper noun, as in critical theory. According to the New Discourses Encyclopedia, quote, theory, treated as a proper noun and thus capitalized, is an appropriate catch-all term for the thinking behind critical social justice, especially at the academic level. It is the set of ideas, modes of thought, ethics, and methods that define critical social justice in both thought and activism. That is, theory and praxis, with the things that you do. In a meaningful way, theory is the central object, the canon and source of further revelation of critical social justice. That is, theory is the heart of the worldview that defines critical social justice, end quote. In other words, critical theory is not just an analytical tool, as you've heard him say, oh hey, regenerated, welcome, brother, good to see you, congratulations, God bless Aaron Kite, it's blessings to you and your family, man. I hope you're doing well. The Discord is bustling as always, so looks like we're not slowing down. I'm appreciating of you brothers. I'm still around. It's just hard to find time to stream right now, but I'm trying to find ways I can find a new schedule. So tonight we're just going to be doing some more book studying. So let's see. In other words, critical theory is not just an analytical tool. I think who said Walter Strickland. You're telling me? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you had a really good thing going there, man. But like, yeah, life falls. Like I didn't stream for like 6 weeks because I'm moving houses, and like where I'm streaming from right now is like my new house. Like I had to, me and my dad finish this whole like room. It was an unfinished basement before, so now it's coming together really nicely. So moving houses, lots of stuff at work and stuff. So, but been good. Now, who was it who said? Thank you, Sam man. Curse Woods. I'm thinking of Curse Woods. Yeah. It is the resolution eye is an analytical tool. So I have a feeling you're gonna see kind of thing a lot. In this book. This is very, very fitting too for this to be doing this because like the SBC analytical tool, yeah. But no, it's very fitting that we do this because like the SBC is gonna have their crazy convention. I say crazy just because it's been like the things that Russell Moore and stuff has been saying and then like Jared Longshore's response to it and Mike Stone's response to it, and it's gonna be a you would hope that it wouldn't be like a really conflagrated meeting, but it might end up being that way. It's gonna be nuts, right, Regen? My pastor's going. Sad I couldn't accompany him. Yeah, it is sad. I for sure your voice would have been, you know, good to throw into the fray as well, because you know I consider you a very trustworthy person theologically. But man, like the Russell Moore thing, right? Like I think Jerry Longshore nailed it, where he was like, what was he saying now? It was Jared Longshore and it was Doug Wilson. Both of them nailed it, where it was like, yeah, I have it right here. Jared said, the fact that Dr. Moore's letters were leaked means they were not intended to expose things, and therefore he was purportedly going to move on without speaking out. You see? Like, I actually hadn't thought of that until he said that. Like, oh yeah. It's like, oh, it was leaked, but it happens to say, like, hey, all this stuff is going on in the SBC. There's, like, racists and neo-Nazis and stuff in the SBC. But, like, what? You were just not going to do anything about it? You were only going to say something behind closed doors to J.D. Greer? Like, it's just, it's such a mess. Like, either way with that, right? See, again, I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, and I was like, maybe, like, it's possible, maybe. Like, I was coming humming and hawing about it. Because, like, it to me, my first gut reaction was to be like, yeah, it was leaked intentionally. But it's like, oh, but yeah, Regen nailed it. Jared is just putting him in double jeopardy, right? Where it's like, and I also agree with you, he has a right to do so. Because here's the thing, is like, if Russell Moore didn't intend to leak like, let's say, he's either lying about it and slandering the believers in Christ, or he's just lying, right? So it's either or no, he's either lying and slandering his brothers, or he kept all this stuff, all these neo-Nazi stuff, all the sex scandal stuff on the down low until he left the ERLC, had no power to do anything about it. Like, that's really weird, right? So it's. I think at this point, I think Jared put him in double jeopardy. He was right to do so, and we're gonna see. Honestly, if there should be an investigation about this, because, man, this is why you're saying it's gonna be a spicy one. It's gonna be a spicy convention because, you know, you gotta be really, really mindful about the tactics that are being run on the Christians in the SBC, right? Just from the get-go, right? Where I was like, Resolution 9 came down, and the convention didn't even know what critical race theory was, and they wanted to like hammer through all of the resolutions because they were running out of time or something. You know, kudos to Tom Askell for like saying, no, we're not doing that. Right? He objected, right? It's so bizarre what's going on in the SBC right now, but we'll see. I have a feeling it'll probably get touched on a little bit in this book as well. So, critical theory. In other words, critical theory is not just an analytical tool, as some have suggested, Curtis Woods. It is a philosophy. It is a worldview. Critical race theory. Perhaps the most important concept to grasp for the purposes of this book is critical race theory, CRT. Critical race theory is an outgrowth of critical legal studies, CLS, which was a leftist movement that challenged traditional legal scholarship. And that's a reference. The reference there is an article titled, "What is Critical Race Theory?" UCLA School of Public Affairs, Critical Race Studies. There's been much debate over critical race theory within evangelical circles recently. Some have accused those of us who are leery of CRT of creating straw men and labeling everything we disagree with or that makes us uncomfortable as CRT. Therefore, it is important that I allow CRT to define itself in order to demonstrate that when I refer to this ideology, I am not making things up, taking them out of context, or building a straw man. I am merely taking its founders and practitioners at their word. According to the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, quote, CRT recognizes that racism is ingrained in the fabric and system of the American society. The individual racist need not exist. So now we're not talking about people anymore. The individual racist need not exist to note that institutional racism is pervasive in the dominant culture. Now we're already getting away from like the biblical definitions of how to like right the wrongs that are in your society. This is the analytical lens that CRT uses in examining existing power structures. CRT identifies that these power structures are based on white privilege and white supremacy, which perpetuates the marginalization of people of color. CRT also rejects the traditions of liberalism and meritocracy. Legal discourse says that the law is neutral and colorblind. However, CRT challenges this legal truth by examining liberalism and meritocracy as a vehicle for self-interest, power, and privilege. End quote. Many discussions of CRT have referenced this definition, and with good reason. First, it is as clear and succinct definition as you will find. Second, it captures the essence and major tenets of CRT. Third, it comes from a source that has led the charge for CRT in recent years. Which means, fourth, that it is a case of proponents of CRT defining themselves. Note also that this definition, without using the word worldview, describes precisely that. One way to define a worldview is, quote, an analytical lens one uses to examine the world, end quote. And we talk about worldviews a lot on this channel, and regardless of whether I'm gaming or streaming or my study streams, we talk about that kind of thing a lot because it comes up. It's a common theme in every story. Is like people's different characters, different people's worldviews affect the way they interact with the world. So it's only natural to bring this kind of topic up. According to Richard Delgado, the worldview. This book has been great so far. I'm on chapter 7. Chapter 3 will not make Amazon happy. I'm looking forward to it now. Now I'm looking forward to reading it even more. Seeking True Justice is the title of that chapter. Okay. I'm interested. If I get banned, I've said some things on here that would get me banned many times. So if I do get banned, I guess I'm going on to YouTube. I don't know. According to Richard Delgado, the worldview of CRT is based on 4 key presuppositions. So one is, yeah, it's one, two, three, yeah. One is racism is normal. The usual way society does business, the common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. And so, yeah, he's going to be, each of these 4 points is going to be from Richard Delgado's book, Critical Race Theory. So, racism is normal, is one. Number 2, convergence theory. Quote, racism advances the interests of both white elites, materially, and working class whites, psychically. Large segments of society have little incentive to eradicate it. End quote. This all means that whites are incapable of righteous actions on race and only undo racism when it benefits them, when their interests converge with the interests of people of color. Number 3, anti-liberalism. CRT questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. And number 4, knowledge is socially constructed. Storytelling and narrative reading is the way black people forward knowledge versus the science and reason method of white people. Oh, man, that's super racist. Like, imagine thinking that way. It's like, you black people, you have storytelling and narrative, and we white people have reasoning. Like, that is, like, both people need both things. They live the lives knowing that they use and adopt both methods of understanding information. Like, that's why fiction's important. Because, like, storytelling is an important part of the human mind. It's like, it's what this is all about, right? I think during the Wokeness and the Gospel conference this past weekend, Owen Strand said the same thing during one of his presentations. He was like, CRT's only goal is to divide. That's what it does. It's what it's designed to do. It's what it will do if you introduce it in any meaningful sense. And this is clearly one way. The idea that the whites have science and reasoning and the blacks have storytelling and narrative is, man. Okay, let's keep going. It's like, how do people not see it? How do people not see how racist that is? Anyway, let me read this again. Storytelling narrative reading is the way black people forward knowledge versus the science/reason method of white people. Minority status, in other words, brings with it a presumed competence to speak about race and racism. The legal storytelling movement urges black and brown writers to recount their experiences with racism and the legal system, and to apply their own unique perspectives to assess law's master narratives. While this is a well-established summary, Tara Yoso, one of the most cited academics on critical race theory, expands Delgado's fourth tenet with a very important dimension. So I guess addendum 4, the centrality of experiential knowledge. CRT recognizes that the experiential knowledge of people of color is legitimate, appropriate, and critical to understanding, analyzing, and teaching about racial subordination. Again, that depends, right? Like, your experiences are your experiences, but, like, objective truth, this is why they throw it away, because objective truth would say you had your experiences in your life, but it doesn't change what the truth is, right? Because it's very much like it's not about what's the truth, it's about what your truth is. Intersectionality. If Derek Bell is the father of CRT, then he is the grandfather of intersectionality. The idea was popularized by Bell's Harvard Law School protege, Kimberlé Crenshaw, and is best summed up in her 2 seminal papers, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black Feminist Critique of Anti-Discrimination Doctrine, Feminist Theory, and Anti-Racist Politics. Published in 1989. Oh, this goes back a little bit, eh? Back to when I was born. And Mapping the Margins, Intersectionality, Identity Politics, and Violence Against Women of Color, published in 1991. I offer the full titles as they give a glimpse into Crenshaw's worldview. Put simply, intersectionality is about the multiple layers of oppression minorities suffer. For instance, if a black person has 1 layer of oppression, a black woman has 2, a black lesbian woman has 3, etc. The Encyclopedia of Diversity and Social Justice offers a helpful summary. Quote, our experiences of the social world are shaped by our ethnicity, race, social class. I don't know why you make 2 different distinctions there, but ethnicity, race, social class, gender identity, sexual orientation, and numerous other facets of social stratification. Some social locations afford privilege, e.g. being white, while others are oppressive, e.g. being poor. Oh, man. Oh, that's so bad. Those EGs are hilarious. Like, the example being privileged is being white, and the example of being oppressed is being poor. Okay, I mean... I am reminded of when Joe Biden said... what did he say? It was like, poor kids are just as smart as white kids or something like that. Those poor kids are just as smart as the white kids. Hey, black entrepreneurs are just as good as the white entrepreneurs, but you know what? They don't have lawyers and accountants. And it's like, do you realize what you're saying? Anyway, these various aspects of social inequality do not, yeah, right, they're generated. These various aspects of social inequality do not operate independently of each other. They interact to create interrelated systems of oppression and domination. The concept of intersectionality refers to how these various aspects of social location intersect to mutually constitute individuals' lived experiences. I think it's funny at this point where, like, you can sort of tell where people stand on a lot of things based on the way they talk. Like, if you ever hear someone say lived experiences unironically, it's a little bit like the pronoun test. Like, I thought it was pretty funny that it was amusing that someone made jokes about how you can tell someone's kind of position based on whether they have pronouns in their bio or not. And I thought it was amusing, but then when I started noticing how accurate it was, I thought it was hilarious. And it's kind of a similar thing here, where it's like, if you hear someone say lived experiences and, you know, BIPOC, you know, these kinds of new speak words that just, they mark you out as being generally of being one ideological perspective. It's almost like, really, it's almost like, think about it this way. It's almost like, we talked about how wokeism, like woke thought is like a religion, right? And so how, like, in Christianity we have, like, we would say we have Christianese, you know, we talk about justification and sanctification and regeneration and you know, some man says pronouns in bio is like posting your baptism. Right, it's like saying your denomination kind of thing, right? So it's like, even though you can't know all the nuances of each individual person, you can like make you can broadly understand where they're coming from once they have pronouns in their bio, or they use certain kinds of words in the same way that us Christians would use certain words, and that's how you kind of tell that we're Christians, kind of thing, right? We have a certain vocabulary. There are volumes written on these concepts, and I commend them to you. I have benefited greatly from the work of people like Neil Shenby, Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, and a host of others. Their work is thorough, insightful, and much needed in these times. I also recommend diving into the sources I have cited here and throughout this book for an inside look at what CRT and intersectionality say about themselves. Introduction. At 5:12 a.m. on April 18th, 1906, a temblor deep inside the Earth's surface shook the San Francisco Bay Area. It was followed 25 seconds later by a 7.9 magnitude earthquake, which lasted between 45 and 60 seconds. It came to be known as the Great San Francisco Earthquake, one of the most significant of all time. According to the U.S. Geological Society, quote, the earthquake was felt from southern Oregon to south of Los Angeles and inland as far as central Nevada, end quote, and ruptured 296 miles of California. Yet, the significance of the San Andreas Fault and its cumulative effects would not be fully recognized until the advent of plate tectonics more than half a century later. Over the next century, San Francisco would experience even more seismic culture changing events, but it would not be the ground that would shake. Another kind of earthquake in San Francisco. In late 1966, white police officers in San Francisco caught 3 teens joyriding in a stolen car through a mostly black neighborhood called Hunters Point. The teens ditched the car and fled on foot as the police chased them. One of the boys, 16-year-old Matthew Johnson, ignored a cop's warning to stop running, and the cop shot him 4 times, killing him instantly. San Franciscans rioted for 3 days in protest, wreaking such havoc that the mayor eventually called in assistance from 2,000 National Guard troops with tanks to help local and state police quell the violence. On May 25th, 2020. Oh, wow, we're talking about George Floyd in this book. That's very, like, up to date. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, was arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit bill at a Minneapolis store. He died as a white police officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes to subdue him. As a result, nearly 8,000 protests, many of them violent, rocked 2,500 cities from coast to coast for 4 months. These events, combined with subsequent calls to defund the police, some of which passed, showed many Christians, for the first time, the shakiness within our culture, and underscored it for the rest. But this fault line is not new. He said the thing. This fault line is not new. It has been quietly forming underneath our feet for a long time, around the area of social justice. And the church must be awake and aware of what it means and where it comes from. He said the thing. Roll credits. Otherwise, we will fall victim to it, as many leading Christian voices already have. The nature of the coming catastrophe. Why are people and groups like Thabiti Anyabwile, Tim Keller, Russell Moore, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the ERLC, 9 Marks, the Gospel Coalition, TGC, and Together for the Gospel, T4G, being identified with critical social justice on one side of the fault, and then people like John MacArthur, Tom Askell, Owen Strachan, Douglas Wilson, and the late R.C. Sproul being identified on the other. There are groups and ministers that have embraced CRT, and those are problematic. But there is a larger group that is sympathetic to it because of their desire to fight what they see as a problem of racial injustice. Most of the groups I will mention in this book fall into the latter category. You get to the follow, yes. Blessings to you. Thank you for following Regen. Appreciate it, man. A lot of the dudes who frequent my chat are really great dudes. I recommend Regenerated, his content. Let's see. So this is good. So right off the bat, so right in the introduction, Voddie is saying most of the people in the book are going to refer to, are about, look, they see a problem and they want to fix it. And I think that's where a lot of Christians are too. It's like they see a problem, they want to fix it. Being charitable, they see a problem in the world, injustice, and they go, how do you fix it? And it's like, they just don't believe that the Bible has any answers for that. I don't know, like, it's not always clear why. I believe it's, my personal thought is that generally it's sort of like an antinomian type style reasoning. They go like, oh man, the Bible doesn't have anything to say about social problems, does it? It's just about, you know, Andy Stanley style, like just believe in Jesus kind of stuff. And it's like, yes, Jesus is our Lord and King, but that means that you have to, you know, why do you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I say? or the Great Commission in Luke 24, right? Is like, part of that is teaching them, the nations, to obey all that I've commanded you. So it's like Christ's kingdom has a lot to say about how we should be living in the world, and I just think a lot of Christians have never wrestled with or thought about it, which is why I'm so appreciative of people like, you know, the Sword and the Trowel, like you know, Tom Askell and Jared Longshore, and like Owen Strachan, and like Douglas Wilson. These are you know, Jeff Durbin and James White. These are all men. I can go on. Joe Boots. These are all men who they see the necessity to wrestle with the cultural, like social issues, and actually giving biblical answers rather than going somewhere else for the answers, going to Karl Marx and going to the Frankfurt School and all that. I tend to start turning out content again soon now that the baby's here. Oh, let's go! Congratulations again, and yeah, good to see you getting that podcast getting back in the swing of things with that podcast. So, let's see. It is not a stretch to say we are seeing seismic shifts in the evangelical landscape. But is it an exaggeration to call this a coming catastrophe? I don't think so. John MacArthur calls it, quote, the greatest threat, end quote, to the gospel in his lifetime. And he had a front row seat to the debates over both inerrancy and lordship salvation. I was not there for those things, but I can see how he would have said that and thought that, for sure. And CRT is like a very, if left unchecked, CRT will divide not only like families, it'll divide churches, it'll destroy the SBC. Like unless a clean break is done or something, like it'll destroy the SBC too, because as we said, the purpose of CRT is to divide. What do I, MacArthur, and a myriad of other pastors and leaders see on the horizon that leads to such drastic statements? Before I answer that question, let me first tell you what I do not see as the root of the problem. Our problem is not growing ethnic tensions. O.J. Simpson, Rodney King, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Just say these names, and you can divide a room. On one side, we will be people who see the incidents those names represent as evidence of America's systematic racism. The others will argue that they were isolated incidents, at least some of which represented justifiable actions taken by the police. Chances are the discussion will not end in agreement, or even one side moving slightly toward the other. Instead, they will simply continue slipping past each other along the fault line. Growing ethnic tension is a problem, but it is not the main problem. While troubling, it is no match for the truth of the gospel and the unity it creates among those who embrace it. Amen. I've been watching a lot of Torchlighters with my nieces and nephews. It's like basically it's like a reenactments done via cartoon of like famous. Well, they should be way more famous than they really are, but like they were famous martyrs and missionaries and stuff. And some of these stories are absolutely mind-boggling. Like they're just you couldn't write a better, more like dramatic story that God wrote with these people's lives. And it's like these people, these missionaries, these martyrs, they brought unity where there was division, where there was hardship and evil and paganry, right? So just tonight, just before I started streaming, we were watching one about I think her name was Amy Carmichael, and she was a missionary in India, and her contributions helped to stop this like practice where they would like have temple children, like they would dedicate children to the temple of their god, and they would just either be sacrificed, like be a human sacrifice, or they would just be a slave of the temple for their entire lives. And the gospel of Christ came into that place in India, and it broke down these dividing walls of hostility, and between not only between God and man, but between man and man. And it was just it was amazing. So I recommend Torchlighters series. You know, it's designed for kids, but the stories just are so timeless and moving. And I love the bit there's a bit at the end of the episode where it's like it kind of like tells you where they ended up. Like, so here's how the rest of their story went and how they spent the rest of their lives. And it's like based on, they show you like actual pictures of like that they based the cartoon off of and stuff, and it's so cool. But point is like, yes, ethnic tensions are troubling. Like, they are a matter of the gospel invading those tensions, right? We're not going to solve ethnic tensions by creating more ethnic tensions. You're never gonna. God's not ridiculous. You're not gonna fulfill God's law by breaking God's law. It's because God's law isn't ridiculous. So let me start here again. While troubling, it is no match for the truth of the gospel and the unity it creates among those who embrace it. Amen. In fact, such tensions represent an opportunity for Christ's followers to demonstrate the truth of Paul's words. Quote, "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in the flesh the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility." Ephesians 2, verses 13 through 16. Oh, beautiful. Oh, man. The gospel goes out, and it changes people's hearts, and because people's hearts are changed, their culture changes. They stop the gladiatorial games. They stop slavery. They stop child sacrifices. They stop child temple sacrifices. Beautiful. Ethnic tensions are only a problem for Christians who forget this truth or subordinate it to a competing ideology, whether that be on the left or on the right. I'm glad he said that. That's true. When that happens, a fault line appears. Those on one side press the text of the Bible, while those on the other side see that approach as short-sighted and insensitive. The problem is not ethnic tension, but the fundamental assumptions that drive our assessment of and subsequent approaches to it. So again, we're doing one layer deep beyond that. It's yes, the ethnic tension is right, but why is that happening, right? And it has to do with fundamental assumptions. Presuppositions. Our problem is not political divisions. Friends in the US have half-jokingly asked if I moved my family to Zambia in 2015 to escape Trump's America. I may not have been present for the 2016 election, but I was definitely connected and aware. I started writing and speaking on political issues in 2008 during Barack Obama's first run for the White House. At that time, I warned repeatedly of his culturally Marxist worldview. Interesting. It's like, I only started getting into like cultural apologetics and like political type understandings like 5 years ago, I'd say. Probably around there. So probably around the same time when he moved to Zambia. But I did not catch any of that in regards to his reaction. I did not know that Voddie talked about that in regards to Obama's worldview. I also warned that an Obama presidency would not heal, but rather deepen ethnic tensions in America. I also warned much of the same regarding both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016. But neither was the problem. Neither was the problem. On the one side of the election debate were Christians who saw immorality as reason enough to swallow hard and vote for Trump, in the hopes of stemming the tide of illegal immigration and abortion. So I knew a lot of people who did that. I wouldn't have voted for Trump in 2016 if I had the ability to do so. There were a lot of people making that choice. I think I know a lot more people who were willing to vote for him in 2020 after it was kind of shown that he would be trusted a little bit more. Yeah, I remember back in 2016 being like, "Oh man, this guy's trouble," right? Little did I know that 4 years later, he would end his presidency without starting any new wars, which is something that has never happened in my lifetime. But anyway, so neither was the problem. On the one side of the election debate was Christians who saw immorality as reason enough to swallow hard and vote for Trump in the hopes of stemming the tide of illegal immigration and abortion. On the other hand, were those who saw inequalities in healthcare, income, and immigration as reason enough to swallow hard and vote for Clinton in the hopes of stemming a different tide. Our problem, so he went over the two. Our problem is not growing ethnic tensions. Our problem is not political divisions. Our problem is social justice versus biblical justice. Oh, that's good. Exactly. Those belonging to the social justice crowd present themselves as the only ones pursuing justice, to the exclusion of all who disagree with their assessments, who, by that definition, are pursuing injustice. The justice is defined by Scripture, always. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the current struggle is that it mischaracterizes Christians that way too. On one side are compassionate Christians who are concerned about justice. On the other hand are insensitive Christians who are not concerned about justice. So that's like the two senses that you're given, two stories you're given about the sides. On the other, this is wrong. I have pursued justice in my entire Christian life, yet I am about as antisocial justice as they come. Not because I have abandoned my obligation to strive for peace with everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord, Hebrews 12:14. But rather, because I believe the current concept of social justice is incompatible with biblical Christianity. This is the main fault line at the root of the current debate, the epicenter of the big one that, when it finally shifts with all its force, threatens to split evangelicalism right down the middle. Our problem is a lack of clarity and charity in our debate over the place, priority, practice, and definition of justice. The current cultural moment is precarious. I would agree. The United States is on the verge of a race war, if not a complete cultural meltdown. I also agree. If things keep going, man, it's such a weird thing to think about, right? But if things keep going as they're going, I don't see any solution. If we don't turn around and have a reformation and have a revival, the only option left for us is going to be either war or, Lord willing, secession, which would be just a monumental, nigh impossible task to perform. But the Lord knows what He wants for both of our countries, both for America and Canada. So yeah, complete cultural meltdown, and the rest of the Western world seems to be following suit. Tensions are rising in every place the African slave trade has left its indelible mark. However, as much as I love and want the best for America, I am far more concerned about the precarious moment facing evangelicals. I am not a pessimist. I believe the Lord's church will survive until He comes, and this moment is no exception. Amen. God's people have faced other, and I would argue more significant, obstacles in the past. I don't think anyone would say that what we are dealing with here rises to the level of the Spanish Inquisition or the Protestant Reformation in terms of threatening our unity. There is nothing like the drowning of the Anabaptist martyr Felix Manz on our current radar screen. Nevertheless, there is trouble afoot. navigating through the issue. The goal of this book is not to avoid the looming trouble. In fact, I believe that there is that to be neither possible nor desirable. The trouble has arrived. Right, yeah, that's another good point there. It's like, Christians didn't go looking for trouble, like, it found us, right? And so we need to be addressing it. CRT, intersectionality, you know, LGBTQ stuff, you know, affecting young kids as well as adults alike. You know, conversion therapy being banned, conversion therapy as described by the Canadian law being banned. Trouble comes for Christians because we, for the most part, for many years, were a Christian nation. We were guided by Christian principles. So it's not like how it was in Rome, where like Christians were kind of keeping to themselves, like down low, and kind of keeping to themselves on the down low, and then expanded that way. We sort of are. We still are doing that. Of course, that's the natural progression of the kingdom of God. But we how do I put this? We have more ground than maybe some Christians in Rome had, and I feel like we cede ground a lot. We surrender ground constantly. You know, in the media, in art, in the arts, in business. You know, we don't want to ruffle any feathers, and so we just end up just constantly, you know, surrendering. And we need to realize that we come from a long line of incredible, brave people who were not perfect, and were never. I mean, I don't know why you have to even say that. Of course, they weren't perfect. I mean, we feel compelled to say it all the time in these discussions, but we come from a long line of great people, and Christians do, and we shouldn't just say that America and Canada is just systemically racist and everything is awful and we're the worst countries ever. And that would be throwing away all of the blood, sweat, and tears that our Christian forebears put into creating something out of nothing, you know. Okay, so trouble has arrived. It came for us. It will not go away anytime soon, and the division it is causing is necessary. Oh, interesting, yeah. I choose the fault line metaphor because I believe it not only describes the catastrophe, but also the aftermath. There are two competing worldviews in this current cultural moment. One is the critical social justice view, which assumes that the world is divided between the oppressors and the oppressed. White, heterosexual males are generally viewed as the oppressor. The other is what I will refer to in these pages as the biblical justice view, in order to avoid what I accuse... in order to avoid what I accuse the social justice crowd of doing, which is immediately casting its opponents as being opposed to justice. In evangelical circles, that paints us as opposed to God himself, since every effort has been made to demonstrate that social justice is a gospel issue. There are plenty of sincere, though perhaps naive Christians who, if they knew the ideology behind it, would run away from the term social justice like rats from a burning ship. As legendary economist Friedrich Hayek once said, quote, "I have come to feel strongly that the greatest service I can still render to my fellow man would be that I could make the speakers and writers among them thoroughly ashamed ever again to employ the term social justice." End quote. The current moment is akin to two people standing on either side of a major fault line just before it shifts. When the shift comes, the ground will open up and divide that was once invisible. Sorry. The ground will open up, a divide that was once invisible will become visible, and the two will find themselves on opposite sides of it. That is what is happening in our day. In some cases, the divide is happening already. Churches are splitting over this issue. Major ministries are losing donors, staff, and leadership. Denominations are in turmoil. Seminary faculties are divided, with some professors being fired or asked to leave. Families are at odds. Marriages are on the rocks. And I don't believe the fracture in this fault line is yet even a fraction of what it will be. I agree. No, I am not writing this book to stop the divide. I am writing to clearly identify the two sides of the fault line and to urge the reader to choose wisely. Nonetheless, addressing this topic usually leaves me open to attacks from people who will accuse me of being a sellout, trying to curry favor with the white people, or not being informed about the struggles Black Americans currently face, or just not understanding the Black perspective. Anyone who knows me will find these things laughable. So let me begin by telling you my story. And here we go. Chapter 1. A Black Man. I was born on the San Andreas Fault. More specifically, I was born in Los Angeles, California, on March 11th, 1969. This was the end of the Great Migration between 1915 and 1970. That saw somewhere between 5 and 10 million blacks leave the South in search for a better life. This migration took place along very specific routes to the north and west, and landed large swaths of the black population in cities like New York, Boston, Detroit, Oakland, Los Angeles, and other major urban areas. Quote, "It was during the First World War that a silent pilgrimage took its first steps within the borders of this country," end quote, writes Isabel Wilkerson in her compelling and eye-opening book, The Warmth of Other Suns. Yeah, I can see the expressions on the faces of my grandparents as she describes the organic, almost unnoticed nature of the movement. Quote, "The fever rose without warning or notice, or much in the way of understanding by those outside its reach. It would not end until 1970s, and would not set into motion changes in the North and South that no one, not even the people doing the leaving, could have imagined at the start of it, or dreamed would take nearly a lifetime to play out. My family was among those who trod these well-worn paths. My third great paternal grandfather, Nazarene, was born a slave in North Carolina in 1835. On my mother's side, I have been able to trace my third and fourth great-grandparents back to slavery in Alabama, Virginia, and Texas between the 1830s and 1860s. Both my maternal grandmother and paternal grandfather came from Texas, while my maternal grandmother made her way up the I-10 from Louisiana. They all eventually found their way to the City of Angels, where they, along with scores of other immigrants, made a life for themselves and their loved ones that offered more promise than they ever could have hoped for in the land they left. My father was born in Los Angeles. My mother didn't arrive there until 1961, at the age of 10. She grew up in Midland, Texas, one of 7 children from 4 different men. She spent most of the 1960 living with her father in Odessa, while my grandmother, who was unmarried at the time, went to Los Angeles to get established before sending for my mother, her older brother, and her younger sister. 3 older siblings had already left home and started families with her father in Tyler. My grandmother would marry the man I called my grandfather the year I was born. He was 20 years her senior and white. Mom and her siblings spent 2 days on a bus from Midland to Los Angeles. Like many who undertook similar journeys, they had only a loaf of bread and some fried chicken. Quote, "We had enough chicken for 2 days, but we ate it all the first day," end quote, my mother recounted as she told me her story again not long ago. Quote, "We didn't have any money, so the second day we just went hungry," end quote. They arrived in Los Angeles and went from a temporary apartment to a permanent home in the Imperial Courts projects in Watts. Quote, "We didn't go outside to play," my mother told me. "There was so much asphalt. We were used to playing in fields and trees," end quote. She was also shocked by the regular fights in the projects where she lived. My mother met my father a few years later when they both attended Jefferson High School in South Central Los Angeles. My dad was a handsome multi-sport athlete. He stood 6.5 feet tall with broad shoulders and a booming voice, and a personality that was more imposing than his stature. My mom stood 5'4" and more than held her own. She had a keen mind and a sharp wit, and an infectious smile. She was a stellar student destined for great things. Their high school romance turned into a teenage pregnancy, a shotgun wedding, and a brief marriage that could not withstand their personal differences or my father's departure for university, and eventual pursuit of a career in professional football. I have seen pictures of the three of us together when I was a toddler, but my parents were not a couple long enough for me to have any memories of our time as an intact family. I would be haunted by this reality for decades to come. Wow, I didn't know Voddie didn't know his dad, really. A child of desegregation. I remember that the day when I was in 3rd grade that my school sent me home with a special letter to give to my mother, one that would have a much greater impact than I could have imagined. It informed her that I would be bused across town to an elementary school in Pacific Palisades. I don't particularly remember my mother's reaction to this, other than her relief that at least this time it didn't have anything to do with my misbehavior. Yes, I was that much of a troublemaker. In fact, I was such a troublemaker that the principal made a deal with me. If I stayed out of his office for the last 3 weeks of the term, he would take me out to eat anywhere I wanted to go. Voddie, a troublemaker? You can almost believe it, right? In a sense, at least. What I do remember is the discussion we had the night before I got on that bus for the first time. My mother reminded me that, though we did not have much, we did have our good name. And whether I liked it or not, I was going to have to uphold that name. She also reminded... That's a really good thing to instill in kids. Like, the idea of saying to somebody, like, saying to your children, like, hey, you are you know, you are a Smith, and so, like, you need to act like one, right? It's kind of like there's an honor that you have, like, not only as a Christian but also as this member of this family, you know. Very healthy to have that sense of honor and duty, both, you know, like I said, both first and foremost for your God, but also toward your family and representing your family well. She also reminded me that I was a black boy about to walk into an all-white school, and this meant that our family name was not my only concern. As she spoke, I did not have the sense that I was a child being instructed, but a soldier being commissioned. I remember feeling like I was about to step onto a stage and assume a role in a drama that, up until then, I had only witnessed from a distance and would rather not participate in. But my participation was not optional. I had to get on that bus. And this, I mean, that's the whole thing right there. Like, why, like, what's with with being forced to go to certain schools, like forced desegregation, like, just let it happen. Just let it happen naturally. Like when I was a kid, for example, right? This is anecdotal, but like when I was a kid, like some of the neighborhood kids were white, some of them were black, some of them were from other European countries. Like, it didn't matter to me because I had not been brainwashed to think that, you know, to look at someone with black skin and be like, oh, you think I'm out to get you, right? You probably are suspicious of me. And it never came to mind. We were all just kids. We were all just playing together, you know. Like, why force desegregation? Like, it's gonna happen naturally by interacting with other people. And teaching your children that to understand that God created all humans as image bearers of God, right? It's like, I could see a lot of damage being done potentially from this sort of like forced busing, forced desegregation. So like, why is he going to an all-white school? Like, why is he forced to do that? Be bussed across town? Why didn't he just go, you know? And this is going to a whole thing about school choice and like, how much I am for that as well. Anyway, so he had to get on that bus. They don't want us here. My time in the Palisades is a blur. My few memories of the semester I spent there were not pleasant. I don't think I had a particularly bad time, but the incidents that stand out to me shaped the way I thought about the world. Two of them demonstrate how my racial identity developed. The first was the fact that my fellow busees and I weren't wanted there. At least that's the way I saw it. Looking back on it, I realized there were several issues, both political and historical, that I could not possibly have understood. To the adults, busing was an issue involving the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, the Los Angeles Unified School District, the state of California, the federal courts, and the history of segregation in the United States. But for us kids, it just felt like we were being forced to go someplace where people didn't want us around. That semester had a tremendous impact on my understanding of what it meant to be black in America. I may have been too young to understand the complex, multi-layered drama going on around me, but I could definitely understand what it meant to feel unwelcome. I could also understand, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to be poor and disadvantaged. By the time we got off the bus in Pacific Palisades, we were keenly aware that 1, we weren't in South Central anymore, and 2, these people had a lot more money than we did. The day I didn't get expelled. The second thing that I always stands out in my mind when I think about my time in the Palisades is the day I didn't get expelled. The talk my mother had with me was very effective. I was on the straight and narrow when I got off that bus. We all were, partly because we were in a strange environment, but also because we all felt like we were under a microscope. Nevertheless, it didn't take long for trouble to find me. I have heard it said that you... Oh boy. I've heard it said that you, quote, never forget the first time a white person calls you a nigger, end quote. That was certainly the case for me, but not because I'd never heard it before. I'd actually heard it all my life. People had used it to refer to me, and I had used it to refer to others. When black people used the word, it was a rather benign moniker, even a term of endearment. But from a white person's mouth, it was a weapon being used to demean and dehumanize me. The little boy who said it probably had no idea what he was doing. He used the word like it was a new toy with which he was learning to play. However, when he saw my reaction to it, he used it with greater fervor. He had struck a nerve, and like any kid on the playground who feels like he has figured out how to get the upper hand, he continued to strike at that nerve. The boy would say the word, then run and stand by our teacher. At first, I stopped short, not wanting to get the teacher involved. But after a few rounds of this, I had had enough. That time, as the boy stood next to me, the teacher, I looking smug and satisfied, I calmly walked up to him and punched him in the chest as hard as I could. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. The teacher began yelling, "What is wrong with you?" I looked at her and said, quote, "He kept calling me nigger," end quote. The teacher took us both to the principal's office, where both of our parents were called. What happened next is a bit of a blur. My mother came to the school. She did not tell me that what I did was right or even justified. She didn't say that someone calling me a name, even that name, gave me the right to resort to violence. However, she did say that we were little boys playing a grown-up game and that there was teaching to be done. That boy needed to learn something, and so did I. That boy needed to be disciplined, and so did I. And we both were. We also ended up sitting together at lunch most days after that. Lessons my mother taught me. My mother shaped my thinking about who I was and what I was capable of. She never said or did anything to cause me to believe that my blackness was a curse or limitation. She gave me a sense of agency and accountability that remains with me to this day. She did this by advocating for me, protecting me, disciplining me, and sacrificing for me. There are myriad examples of this, but 4 stories in particular have always stood out in my mind. My mother protected me. The life of a single mother raising a son in Los Angeles in the late 1970s and early 1980s was tough. There were drugs, gangs, crime, poverty, and a host of other traps to which a young man could fall prey. People often ask how I came out of all that unscathed. My answer is always the same. Francis Baucham. My mother was a tough, smart, hard-working, no-nonsense woman who did not suffer fools. Growing up, there were 2 things I never doubted. 1, my mother loved me, and number 2, if I got out of line, she would kill me. One day, as a friend and I were walking home from the store, we took a routine shortcut through the back of a nearby housing project. As we walked and talked, we didn't notice 2 young men following us. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they rushed us. One of them shoved a gun into my face, while the other searched me and my friend for money and/or drugs. We had neither, so they took the bag of groceries we had just bought and ran off. Not long after that incident, my mother decided it was time for a change of scenery. So, we packed our things, got on a Greyhound bus, and for the next 3 days, we crossed the United States to end up in Beaufort, South Carolina, where we would spend the next year and a half living with my mother's oldest brother, Luther Sanders, and his wife before moving to Texas, the place I still call home. Not only would I go to high school, college, and seminary in Texas, but it is also where I met and married my wife, welcomed all 9 of my children. 9 children! I didn't know he had 9 children. Wow, amazing. Good for him. Welcomed all 9 of my children and started my ministry. I often say, I am Californian by birth, but a Texan by the grace of God. Luther, or Uncle Kid, as we called him, was and is a hero. He is a laid-back, soft-spoken, slow-talking Southerner. If you were to meet him, you might mistake him for a simple country boy. You'd be wrong. Uncle Kid served for 22 years in the United States Marine Corps and survived 2 tours in Vietnam. He spent part of his time in the Marines as a drill instructor, some in canine training and handling, and later became a certified scuba diver. Uncle Kid was so committed to the Corps after 9/11, he walked onto the closest base and tried to re-enlist. He was in his 50s at the time. In his 50s. I could write a whole book about Uncle Kid. Perhaps someday I will. But for now, you just need to know that when my mother saw I needed something she felt she couldn't provide for me by herself, in Los Angeles, she knew where to go. It was the best thing that could have happened to me, and words are inadequate to express my gratitude. My mother sacrificed for me. My mother graduated from the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas in 2000. She was 49 years old. I remember sitting in the audience, crying like a baby. My wife was rubbing my back and hugging my neck, and our children were asking, "What's wrong with Daddy?" I couldn't explain at the time, but I would go on to use that moment to impress upon my children the value of sacrifice. My mother graduated from college at 49 because she got pregnant at 17. Yes, she made a moral choice that cost her. However, man, could you imagine that she had Voddie. Like, God used Voddie in the way he's being used right now in his entire ministry in Zambia, and like, because she made a moral choice and made a morally good choice when she was 17. However, not everyone faced with the consequences of that same moral dilemma decided to do what my mother did. Some chose abortion. It wasn't legal in the 1960s, but it was available. Others chose to leave the child with a relative, while still others put their child in the system. I do not presume to understand the circumstances that led other women to make different choices. this is not about them. My point is simply this. When they called my mother's name and she walked across that stage to receive her diploma, her classmates and teachers applauded her because of the tenacity and determination she showed in working and going back to school in her 40s. I, on the other hand, applauded her for the sacrifices she had made earlier in her life by working and raising a son by herself in her 20s and 30s. By the time my mother graduated from college, I had 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's of divinity, and was finishing a doctorate. Some people see their parents' diplomas on the wall as a motivation for them to follow in mom's or dad's footsteps and get a degree. I had already done that. What I hadn't done yet was raise my children and launch them into adulthood. My mother's diploma said, "This is what sacrifice, determination, and redemption looks like." My mother was neither a perfect woman nor a perfect parent, but in her imperfection, she showed me that what it looks like to sacrifice for your kids. My mother advocated for me. My wife, Bridget, is often amazed by the stories my mother has told her about my days in elementary school. She finds it hard to fathom how much of a troublemaker I was. One of the stories my mother often tells is of the day she came to visit my class, probably for a parent-teacher conference about my behavior. My mother always had a job or two, so she would drop by the school whenever she could. That day she dropped by during reading time. As she met with the teacher, she noticed that the books on my group's table were different than those the other groups were reading. She asked about it, and I was told that my group was at a lower reading level. At that point, my mother called me to the teacher's desk, gave me a look, and that shook me to my core, then turned to the teacher and said, "Give me a book." The teacher reached for one of the readers on her desk. "No," my mother corrected, "give me your book." The teacher protested, assuring my mother that her book was far beyond my reading level. At which point my mother simply pointed to the book and held it out her hand. The teacher handed her the book. My mother opened it to a random page, handed it to me, and then folded her arms and said, "Read this." I knew I was in trouble. There was no way out. If I fumbled through the book, my mother would know that I was playing dumb at school. However, if I read it, my teacher would know I had been playing dumb at school. Either way, I knew I would be toast when I got home. So I did the only thing I could. I began to read the book. The teacher, a rather pale white woman, began to grow increasingly red. Her jaw dropped and her eyes doubled in circumference. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I finished the passage, handed the book to my mother, then turned and walked back to my group. Oh, but it wasn't over. Before I could get back to the table, my mother said, "Oh no, that's not your group anymore." She then told the teacher, "I see that all his little buddies are at that table. Voddie doesn't care about reading as much as he cares about being with his homeboys." And she was right. I was a little black boy growing up in South Central Los Angeles during the heyday of the Crips and Bloods. It wasn't cool to hit the books, so I underperformed so as not to stand out. Interesting. Very interesting. Oh man, that's interesting. I wonder how common that is. But not that day. That day, Francine's, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but Frances Baucham had come to class. That day, she reminded me and my teacher that she, not the streets, had the last word. My mother disciplined me. Several years after that incident, my mother would remind me, once again, that when it came to academics, Frances Baucham did not play. It all started with a progress report. There were report cards sent home midday through the semester to give parents an idea how their children were doing. Mine contained a C in one subject. When my mother saw that, she went ballistic. Space doesn't allow for the long story, but the short version is, she told me I couldn't play football. Not that I couldn't play in the next game, she told me I couldn't even practice. Next day, I told our head coach, Diz Reeves, what had happened. Coach Reeves was a living legend in Texas football, and in Texas, that's saying a lot. He immediately brought me into his office, sat down behind his desk, and called my mother to straighten things out. What happened next was epic. Coach started out trying to reason with my mother, and the conversation went something like this. Coach Reeves. Mrs. Baucham, remember, this was only a progress report. Mom. I'm aware of that, Coach. Coach Reeves. I assure you, Voddie will bring the grade up by the end of the semester. Mom. Oh, trust me, I know he will. At least, he'd better. Coach Reeves. Your son is one of the smartest players I have ever coached. Mom says, this is not about how dumb other players are. This is about what I expect from my son. I can't recall exactly what my mother said after that. What I can tell you is that Coach Reeves's side of the conversation suddenly turned into a series of yes ma'ams and no ma'ams, and then I understand. Finally, he hung up the phone, looked at me, and said, son, you better get your grade up, and I hope your mama lets you come back next week. My mother and Coach Reeves would go on to become the best of friends. Years later, he would say, I wish every one of my players had a mother like Frances Baucham. And he would tell the story often of the time he lost his best player for a week, not because he was flunking a class, but because his mother would not tolerate a C on a progress report. I was performing below my ability and below my mother's expectations, and in my house, that was simply unacceptable. I would go on to excel academically for the rest of my life. In high school, I was not only a captain on the football and track teams, I was also a leader of our student government, a peer counselor, an officer in the Spanish club and the math club, a member of the Honor Society, listed in Who's Who among American high school students, a member of Mu Alpha Theta, which is a national high school and junior college honor society for mathematics, a merit scholar, and graduated near the top of my graduating class of over 400 students. Dude, this guy is storied. I was not a good student at all. I did not know he was really good at mathematics. I would eventually attend college on a football scholarship, but I saw that as a means to an end, and that end was not football. My first 3 recruiting visits were to Rice University, the Harvard of the South, West Point, and the United States Air Force Academy. So what? At this point, you may be asking, this book is about critical race theory and the church. What does any of this have to do with social justice and the current conversation about race in America? The answer is everything. I grew up poor, without a father, and surrounded by drugs, gangs, violence, and dysfunction in one of the toughest urban environments imaginable. Yet through all of that, I didn't just survive, I thrived. Not because of government programs or white people doing the work of anti-racism. I thrived in large part because, by God's grace, my mother protected me, sacrificed for me, advocated for me, and disciplined me. Black people often take offense when they hear me speak about the importance of family and personal responsibility. The attitude Jesse Jackson expressed when he was caught on a hot mic saying he wanted to, quote, quote, cut President Obama's nuts off, end quote, when he heard him, quote, talking down to black people, end quote, is both real and common. There are those to whom any response to the plight of black people in America that emphasizes something other than systematic racism, white supremacy, or white privilege is seen as blaming the victim. You've heard of this before. The kind of the you know, oh, it's racist to say, like, you need to have a different understanding of the world, or to you know, it's not a matter of pulling out yourself up by your own bootstraps, but it's a matter of not getting involved in gangs and having a stable, or at least again, a sense of duty, a sense of honor, a sense of chivalry. These are all important concepts. They're not white concepts. Like the picture that is being painted is that concepts of objectivity and chivalry and honor, these things are good, human, godly things, and they're being painted as white things. You know, Christianity is a white man's religion, and all of the things that come from Christianity are white things. It's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. Advocates of this victim mentality think the only thing that can cause a man like me, to focus on the centrality of family and personal responsibility is internalized racism, a lack of sensitivity, catering to white folk, being out of touch with blackness and or the black experience, or all of the above. Well, those people don't know me. They don't know my story. And in fact, until you hear everything else I have to say, you don't know my story either. It took more than a strong mother and a bus ride to South Carolina to save me. Let me just quickly just check here. Oh. I think we probably should end it there because the next chapter is like 20 pages long. So we'll probably end that there. Okay, so I'm gonna put a cap on that. So we covered some basic terminology of CRT. Of course, Voddie's case is very interesting because, as was mentioned in that story, that's what you often hear. You hear it all the time. People want to dismiss Voddie because, in his perspective, because, oh, well, he's one of them Oreos, to quote, this is a term that I've heard people, like some self-professed Christians use, right? Like Eric Mason's a self-professed Christian who used the term Angloid on the inside. Angloid on the inside. All these black folk they're black on the outside, but they're white on the inside, you know? It's just awful. It's just to make certain virtues conditioned upon your skin, like your white skin, is just beyond the pale. It's incredible that people don't see the blatant problem with that. So, next study stream, which again we'll have to see when I can fit one in. I will do chapter 2 of Fault Lines, and what do I do? Properties, yeah. We'll do chapter 2, Black Christian. And also, for those of you who, I know that at least one person I know, which is Yoshi OST. He is a fan of A.D. Robles, and I am as well. And I went ahead and got his book. Oh, that does not look good on the there it is. Social Justice Pharisees, Woke Church Tactics and How to Engage Them. I've been helped immensely by A.D. Robles' very tough but fair sort of approach to these things. I'm hoping to get through this book as well. After Fault Lines, maybe. It's not going to be a long read, I think. But it'll cover a bunch of basic things in regards to the issue as well, of the woke church. So this is specifically about Fault Lines, great book. We just finished reading the first chapter. I'm just kind of wrapping up here. Seal, welcome, brother. So I'll probably be reading this one as well after that, and after Fault Lines. So chapters are about how the woke church attempts to frame you, how the woke church is primarily a political movement that gets the politics completely wrong, how the woke church stretches biblical passages beyond their limits, and then a bunch of engagements about common objections in regards to biblical law and how woke social justice differs from biblical law. And I think it'll be a really informative thing. So, thank you, AD, for sending that to me. He was asking for pre-orders and stuff on his website. He sent it to me personally. So, okay, I think that'll do it for everyone. Let me just quickly see if there's anybody streaming, and we'll send the raid over there. Let's okay, I think we should raid someone we haven't raided in a while. So let's go over to AC stream. So he's getting ready for a stream now. Thank you guys for joining me. We'll get to chapter 2 shortly. We'll see. I'll try to maybe get in one more Alright, yeah, Ace Raid, yeah. Spam the Fuki mind blows if you've got them. Just let them know I sent you. God bless you guys. I'll talk to you soon.